Hello, Jim Howard here in Fort Worth, Texas. Today's date, it is December 5th of 2022. It's 7:30 a.m. in the morning. It's a Monday morning. Uh, our son sent us something by Amazon. It's supposed to be here today. It's like I think a Christmas package of cheese and I guess nuts and things like that. So we're waiting for that. I'm working with these two computers, Windows 11 computer here, two monitors. The camera is up on top of this one, and over here is the Chrome box, and I've got the Avery Media camera hooked up over on that one over there. I've got a wavelength docking station that I use a little bit. Actually, right now I've just moved things around. I don't think there's anything hooked up to it yet. And I also have this pluggable docking station display link. And I'm going to plug this in over here to give me some more outlets or whatever. This one doesn't have, the other one has a USB mini plug-in. This one doesn't. This has the see this. I don't know if you can see this is green or not. This takes one of those cables that sort of looks like the cable that has the end that goes into like printers and a few things like that, but it's different. And I think that's going to be like the same as a mini. And then I know it will because I've actually used it. Then I'll be able to use the extra things on this. Time for that. I've got my hat on because with the camera up there looking down on top of my head, it's not pretty. You can pretty much see where, surgery was done on the top of my head to remove skin cancer. And so it doesn't get good circulation, and it was a ugly head to begin with, but surgery didn't help it. But I'm not a hat person. My head was just not made for hats. But I spent, well, when I started out life, when I got out of high school and went down to enlist right away, and they threw me out. And so I went to real estate school and graduated. And I didn't take the state board, but I would have passed it if I'd have taken it because it was a good school. And they actually, their test at the school of real estate was you actually took. Maybe not the current test that was being given in, Jefferson City, Missouri, but one of the exact, duplicate of the, and I think we all aced it, I think. Well, not aced it, but, we passed. But then I went to welding school in Cleveland, Ohio, And then I worked as a welder. This is kind of a funny pose. I worked as a welder for about, well, not 26 years. From the time I was like 18 till I was 26, I worked as a welder. So I was almost always wearing, the welding hood and a hard hat. Several times I worked on building railroad cars and gigantic trucks. I mean, big trucks. Mining trucks that, can't, too big to travel on the road. I mean, they were massive. I worked in the body shop. But I also worked on a few places on other types of trucks. And one time I was working underneath the truck, and then I came out and took off my hard hat, and I come along up on the top, that came loose, came down, hit me in the head, and cut my head open. And then I went on with other, well, let's see. The first, let's see, well, I got married, and she had just started a tropical fish shop. So for 4 years, I didn't have to wear a hat. I just had to work. And she took care of ordering the fish and the plants and pricing them, and I did everything else. And I guess I didn't. I guess I didn't wear. See, then we had a Then we had a security patrol service. Well, then I worked before that. I worked for a short period of time for different burns. That's there. Oh, you can't see it. Okay, well, just twist this. Okay, well, you can't see it either, but I don't want to. It's kind of short. Burns, protected by William J. Burns, International Detective Agency. And this one says, warning, protected by Pinkerton. So anyway, then the first hospital I went to work at, I worked 3.5 years there, whatever. There was 10 security officers in the that worked there. I worked there 3.5 years. 2 of the 10 were shot. Dan Stagel was disabled, It's a miracle that he made it. And he came back to work, but he was traumatized, and we were, well, myself and another security officer, we were afraid he would, they put him in a parking lot that was for employees only to park Monday through Friday. And in fact, I've got a picture someplace of me at the bottom of the, I'm not going to go look for it now, I never find it, but it was sort of a good place for him to be, because that was employees only, Monday through Friday, and it pretty much filled up. And then there was a bunch of steps that went up, and then there was the shack up there, and of course he could see everything. My concern was that some young black man was going to get a phone call, hey, your wife is at St. Joe Hospital having a baby, and he was going to jump in his car, race down there. The parking lot would have been filled, if this was Monday through Friday, the daytime. And he would have pulled in, and there wouldn't be a parking spot finally, but he'd look up and see the guard's shack. And he'd jump out of his car and run up the steps. And I think Dan would have shot him dead. I was worried about something like that, and Dan eventually, retired. Then after he was shot, He was shot by, let's see, yeah, two guys came into the parking lot, a different parking lot, and Wabash parking lot, came in, walked up to him and said, "Is this the parking lot for St. Joseph Hospital?" And he said, "Yes." One guy sprayed him with mace, and the other guy shot him. And then they wrestled with him trying to get his gun, and he kept his gun until he collapsed. I mean, he kept it in the holster until he collapsed. And then they took his gun, and the guy was going to shoot him again, and the other guy said, "No, don't, once is enough," and then they left. And by the way, that was my first hospital. That was my, let's see, I know I had a private security patrol service for a year. And, but after Dan was shot, I don't know if it was the next week, maybe it was 2 weeks, but it was almost immediately, there was a thing in the newspaper that in Kansas City, Kansas, at a liquor store, that two guys came in and held the place up for money, and one of them sprayed mace in his eyes, in the liquor store owner's eyes, but they didn't shoot him. And I went to our director of security, who was retired from the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, and I said, "This is, the same MO. We need to investigate, we need to investigate this. And we need to get the police, in Kansas City, Missouri working on this, and we need to get the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department working on it." And the director of security was, retired. And he was a really nice guy. But he said, "No, that's none of our, and whatever." I said, "No, we need to, no, that's, And so not sure how much later on it was those two guys. They must have lived in the area where the hospital was. There may have been other shootings that they did, but later on we found out that they came back and they shot a security guard who was working at a bowling alley. They shot him. I can't remember if they killed him or not. I think there was another, but a shooting that we know of. But and then we found out that one of the guys I don't think it was the guy that did the shooting for some reason. Can't remember now why after all these years. But he was working. Then he came to work at the hospital in food service, and he came out to the parking lot. And when I was working, I don't know if he came out the other times, he came out to the very parking lot where the shooting had, just a few feet from where the shooting is. And at that time, Dan was still in the hospital. And he asked me, "Oh, that security guard that got shot, how is he doing?" And I said, "Doing okay." And then he said, "Does he remember anything?" And I said, "No, doesn't remember anything." And anyway, when the first security officer was shot, I told our hospital administrator when he came in, "There's his blood on the ground, you need to do the following," and he just blew me off. And I said, "This is going to happen again. It may not be a security officer that's shot, it may be a hospital administrator, it may be a doctor, it may be a staff, a member, it may be visitors, but it's going to happen again if something's not done." So then I went to the second shift to take Dan's spot. That was the officer that was shot, and then eventually I went to midnight shift, and then I came back around to the day shift. When I did, quite a few visitors or people coming would say, I thought you were shot. I said, no, that wasn't me. And then I was working the day shift. John Galegas, the security officer, had worked there for quite a while. He, I had purchased, seemed like every place I worked, and I don't think anybody else ever did, I bought a nice shoe shine kit because the nuns were not going to buy anything. They spent money for 10 security officers. That was it. Nothing more. And anyway, I bought a nice shoe shine kit or whatever for all the officers to use, and I kept it stocked, with the shoe polish, stuff like that. I came in and I was working day shift, so I was shining my shoes, getting ready to go home. And John Galegas came in, and he said, "Oh my God, you don't know how to shine your shoes. You were never in the military, were you?" And I said, "Nope, I wasn't in the military." He says, "Here," and then he shined my shoes for me. And then we talked, and then I, went on home. I got called a few hours later. He was shot at 9:15 p.m. in the Wabash parking lot. So when I came in that morning, I was out in the parking lot, and Eugene Segan, a Kansas City, Missouri police officer who patrolled that district, he pulled, into the parking lot, and he said, "I'm awful sorry about John." And he said, "Is there anything we can do?" And I said, "No, I think we're okay." And he said, Are you all going to the funeral?" And I said, "Well, they're having the funeral in the hospital." And he said, "What about the graveside?" And I said, "Well, a couple of us will have to stay here." And he said, "No, you won't." He said, "I'll set it up." He says, "There'll be police here while you guys are gone." And sure enough, when we went to the grave, there was a police car in the Wabash parking lot. There was a police car sitting in the yard with an officer, sitting in the yard drive. And the way the hospital's arranged, not very many people really used the big circular drive at the front of the hospital, I don't think. And there was a police car sitting there, so he was really a good security, really a good police officer. I was sad to see many years later that in the obituaries that he had passed away. And in my blog that I did, I think it was a WordPress one, I'm not sure which, I did, I mentioned in there, that he was the best police officer that I ever, had any encounters with. And right away, his daughter contacted me, and said that, "Thank you for what you said about my father," and everything like that, and said, she said, "It made me cry, but thank you." And she said, "I showed it to my sister, and she cried also." And she said, "We're not going to show it to Mom now, later when she recovers. We want her to see it too." But anyway, the police officer said, "What are you going to do, Jim?" I was waiting for the hospital administrator to show up. And I said, "What makes you think of?" He says, "I know you. What are you going to do?" And I said, "I really don't know, but I'm going to do something." And then the hospital administrator pulled in his Lincoln Continental Mark IV, and I went over. There's John Galegas' blood on the ground there. I said, "Now are you going to do something?" And he laughed. "Maybe I'll get you guys a horse." And then he went on in. Now that parking lot, was visitors parking, and, part of it was for doctors parking. So all the doctors were coming in. And I went over, and they all knew, I knew each one of them, and they all knew me. And I went over, there's John's blood on the ground. I just talked to the hospital administrator and I told him what needed to be done. Well, maybe I didn't say that. And I said, he's not going to do anything. And they said different things, but it was like, what needs to be done? And I told them. And they went straight, all of them. I think all of them went. There might have been one of them that might have said, well, I'm going, I'll take care of this. And then maybe he got sidetracked with a patient or something, but they all went. And, I told them, because I told them before, there was this parking lot this was in the worst neighborhood in Kansas City, Missouri at that time. I know, and I can say that because I grew up in that neighborhood. This was 31st Street, I think 31st Street, and I lived at 35th Street, and this was Main Street, I think. I can't remember. No, that wasn't Main Street. Anyway, they were very close. And I was living in that, I lived with my parents, and then I lived with them until I got married. But of course, my parents moved eventually from that. But when we moved, that was, that was a black area. And so anyway, I told the doctors, they need to put a gate across from the church parking lot that enters in. There wasn't any reason for one to be there, really. I mean, for there to be an opening. And I said, you need to get some bulletproof vest and let's see. I think I said something else. Oh, you need to have it, which they didn't, and you need to have need to talk to the security officers together so we can give you some input and you can tell us, what your opinions are. Anyway, all the doctors went in. I mean, they said, how much do bulletproof vests cost? I said, I don't know. And I don't think Kansas City PD even had bulletproof vests at that time. Maybe they did. I don't think so. And I said, a gate needs to be put up in bulletproof vest. And, doctors, they went in. Anyway, I think that's the first time that I knew what somebody who was a suck ass or a ass kisser or something. Because the jobs I worked at, as a Boilermaker, a welder, that kind of. But anyway, the assistant hospital administrator there, the hospital administrator was black. The assistant administrator was white. And I thought those guys were attached to each other, But anyway, the assistant administrator came out, like it. He never came out. Not as long as the hospital administrator was there, and then they came out usually together. And I saw him coming out. He wouldn't make a very good act, he came out. Oh, dude, oh, Jim. Oh, no, it was first. Oh, Jim, I don't think I needed to come out here. I forgot what I came out here for. Oh, by the way, we're going to put a gate across there, the church parking lot there, and we're going to get bulletproof vests for you guys. And then he went inside. And they did. I stuck around till they did that. It took them a while to get, probably the nuns didn't, well, of course the doctors, I'm sure, were going to kick in. They're different, So the nuns probably didn't have to spend anything. What I cannot forget, and that happened, that was back in the 70s. Anyway, I had taken a picture of John Galegas out in the parking lot. And by the way, we were, you have to be. We were very careful. We never drew our, weapons unless we had to. And we were out in the parking lot, and I had my camera with me. And I said, John, let me take a picture of you. And I said, we shouldn't do this, but, and he was standing almost in the exact spot where he was shot and killed a few months later. I said, take out your revolver. And so he did. He was standing there, and I took his picture. I took several pictures. And that's the only time I ever took a picture. I don't have any pictures of, I did have a picture of myself that somebody took there. But you don't see, I don't know, maybe you see police officers, you know, but probably they're too smart to do that too, you know. Well, they're not too smart to play with their guns or who knows what to use, but not to be a security guard and pull your gun out and be standing there with it. But anyway, so when John Galegas was shot, about 9:15. Both these shootings, by the way, at the hospital security, both happened at 9:15 p.m. in the Wabash parking lot. Coincidence. John Galegas was in the park. He was very careful. Well, we all were. It was. I mean, I'm telling you, it was a bad neighborhood. And I'd already told you I lived in that neighborhood, you know. With my 30 years working hospital security, it seemed like the bad area was following me. Maybe I was the cause of the bad area. After John Galegas was shot, of course, I stayed around to make sure that the hospital got the vest and put the gate up and that kind of stuff. And then I moved on to another hospital that was 25 blocks west. And it was a better neighborhood. It was a better neighborhood. Well, we had a female doctor who had just completed her, I'm not sure what it was. She had a boyfriend who was, I think it was Arabic, some type of Arabic, and she was going back, well, she was going someplace, and he waited in the parking lot, which was like, we called it the interns building, and waited for her to, you know, show up. I'm not sure she was at the hospital. She lived in the interns building. She had gone to school there, and she was also going to school, or I think I just graduated from you know, and whatever. And he waited for her and, you know, shot and killed her and took off. I don't think they ever found him. In fact, years later, I was in Florida, and I was watching one of those things where the father, his son was killed, or whatever they did, the America's Most Wanted, that was it. And they started telling this story and whatever, and whoops, that was it. So they were still looking for him. And anyway, also we had a guy who came to work there at Trinity Lutheran Hospital. I got to go back to the picture, by the way. But we had a guy that I was on the day shift. Eventually, I went to the second shift as supervisor. I was supervisor on a second shift for I don't know how many years, and then I went back to the day shift, not as a supervisor. I didn't want to be supervisor to begin with, and I just wanted to stay on the day shift. I had 4. Was it 4 then or 2? Can't remember. But anyway, the director of security there, he wanted me as a supervisor, and I didn't want to be, and he tried everything he could to get me, no, I want to stay, just working the day shift, have no desire to be a supervisor. And then he sent a lieutenant, the lieutenant to go and I nope. Then he sent a female supervisor, day shift supervisor. and she was, oh, Jim, you put her arm around me. Mr. Ross wants you to go. And I said, no, no. But Mr. Ross was smart. He knew how he had his ways. And then he said, well, Jim, could you do me a favor? I've got a problem on the second shift. Could you just go over and take care of that? There's 2 UMKC police officers who work the second shift, along with another few, 3 security or something. And there's a problem with those 2. Could you go over and take care of that for me? And oh yeah, he knew how to, oh wow, a problem to be solved. And I went over, and I very quickly solved the problem with those 2. And then I ended up working years on the second shift before I finally got back on the day shift. But I was, by the way, born and baptized and First Holy Communion, confirmation, Catholic, went to Catholic grade school, went to Catholic high school. And I'll tell you something that I probably almost never mentioned, because, I've worked with Baptists and born-again Christians and people who, don't believe in having a television set because of their religion, who, think the earth is 10,000, all that kind of stuff. And a whole bunch of them don't like Catholics. And that's fine with me. I don't care. I've given up on them. It has nothing to do with, molesting little boys or anything. It had to do with their politics. That the conference of bishops, who are like prince, they even, refer to themselves as princes of the church, they have, when they have their meetings or whatever, I'm sure not always, but they come out for the, they live well in mansions and have servants and all that kind of stuff, but then they make pronouncements against Democrats. A bunch of them did against John F. Kennedy. And, others, so I just said at the end of the Catholic Church, as far as I'm concerned. For me, I'm not against religion. Well, I'm against some of, luckily I don't have cable television anymore, because there was no way. Yeah, I even programmed them out though, and still I'd go by and there'd be some Protestant up there, with a gigantic following, and Crystal Palace was like one of them, with their thing of send money. There's a thing, they even call it a thing where it's not, you tell people, send $100 and it'll come back to you, 10 times that, and stuff like that. And then the 700 Club, where that guy, I'd occasionally have to go in and stop to see and to ridicule him or whatever. I see cancer. Cancer is being, through the television set. Even in person would be ridiculous, but I see cancer being cured. I see a leg growing back. And stuff like that. Okay, back to, I was talking about hats. Okay, at the first hospital I worked at, no hats required. Second hospital I worked at, the director of security required that we because the hospital I worked at, where I made them get vests, well, this director of security right away made them get vests, made us get vests. I never wore the vest. I didn't wear the vest when they issued them at St. Joe Hospital, because I knew it would get dirty. There was a cover for it, but I knew I'm not going to put on a vest, get it dirty, and then pass it on to. But I left right, and then the second hospital I know where I never wore the vest. And I never really wore the hat. Like sometimes when he was really the director of security, I was working the day shift, I'd have the hat on, and then as soon as he went home or whatever, I'd take the hat off. And I'd tell him that, and he'd laugh. He didn't realize that I was telling him the truth. As soon as you leave, I take the hat off. Ha ha ha, Jim, you're so funny, Truthful is what I was. But back to St. Joe Hospital, and I took a picture of John Galegas, and then he was shot. And he managed to shoot the guy that they both saw each other. Oh, the guy who came through where there was no gate yet, because I hadn't made him build a gate yet. He came through, went over to a car in the doctor's parking lot. It wasn't a doctor's car. You could park there, after 3 o'clock in a p.m. or something, And he was breaking into the car, and John Galegas was not in the guard shack because that was like a target. You didn't want to be in there. If you were in there, you didn't want the light on, And but he was out in the parking lot. They both saw each other at the same time. They both threw and shot each other at the same time. John was hit. If he'd had a bulletproof vest on, he might have had a bruise because, he was hit. And when he hit the ground, he was dead. He managed to hit the other guy. One thing the nuns did invest in, so they were smart. There was a fence around the Wabash parking lot, and it was a high one. And it had military, I'm not sure it's military, but barbed wire. Not barbed wire, but razor wire around the thing. And the only area that didn't have it was where the doctors, where the thing from the church lot, which was closed up there. And then, of course, the main drive for two cars to pull in or 2 cars to pull out or something. Anyway, that guy who was shot, and he ran over and jumped over that fence. I couldn't have, of course he was young. I was young then too, but not that young. He jumped over the fence, and they heard people in the neighborhood heard the gunshots, and a man came out and saw him coming over the fence and saw him run towards the street, and then he watched and he saw the guy collapse on the street, and the guy took his gun and threw it underneath the car. Well, of course, the police, found him and found the gun. The guy survived, though. I'm sure he's probably still alive. It's been a long time. But he was young, younger than I was. Back to my story. The 2 guys that were going around and spraying mace in people's eyes and shooting them after shooting Dan Stagel and going to Kansas City, Kansas, because we found out later that they did do that robbery. Now, I don't know how many other things that didn't, but they shot and killed a few blocks away from the hospital that I worked at, where the shooting took place, a security guard that was working at a bowling alley. And then they went on to shoot a few blocks away at a grocery store, an off-duty Jackson County deputy sheriff who was working off-duty. And then they eventually got him. I don't know how many security officers he could have shot, but when he shot a law enforcement officer. But anyway, so after the John Galegas' shooting, and after I stuck around long enough to make sure that the hospital bought vests and that type of stuff. Also, one of the security officers told the family of John Galegas, Jim Howard, took a picture of John. He's got pictures of him. So the family came to me in the parking lot, and I said, yes, I do. And I had several, you know, but, and I thought, oh shit, because the hospital was going to put up a plaque, you know, and they, the hospital, the nuns or whatever, whoever talked to the family, you know, said, you know, you can we'll put a picture here, you know, so, oh God, not good. But anyway, I had, you know, the pictures made, gave it to the family. Well, God bless the nuns. They didn't put the plaque up because the hospital was moving because of the neighborhood. But of course the nuns, in the papers and everything, the nuns said that they were moving, not because of the neighborhood, but because of the fire escapes were not enclosed, and it would cost so much money to enclose these fire escapes, so they were moving way south, where it was white and safe. So over the years, I asked, I'd run into a security officer who worked at St. Joseph Hospital. By the way, okay, yeah, we got a few more minutes to go. By the way, oh, there was a young security officer that was, well, a young guy hired in. I don't think he'd been a security officer before. He was hired in, and he was really gung-ho. I mean, he was, I had gone to the second shift when John Gallagher was shot, and then I was there for I don't know how long, then I went to the third shift, and then this young guy was hired in, and he was put on the third shift. And talk about a Barney Fife, I don't know, you know. So then I went to the day, and I went to the day shift, I guess, yeah. And so this young kid was, you know, telling me, oh, you should, oh yeah, see, I'd put in, after the shooting, I'd gone to the day shift, and then that shooting happened on of John Gallagher on the second shift. But anyway, so I put into, anyway, the hospital was getting ready to move before the second shooting because they didn't have anybody come in there, even doctors. Occasionally a doctor would show up and say, I'd say, oh, doctor, I haven't seen you in a while, you know. Jim, he says, none of the patients want to come here, so the only way they'll come here is if the other hospitals are all full, or if they have to have something, you know. But anyway, I knew as soon as I got that stuff, I knew I had to move on, and I did. I went to a hospital that was 25 blocks west. But anyway, this young security officer, Jim, you shouldn't leave. We didn't have any supervisors at that place in security, because that would have cost the nuns maybe 10 cents more an hour. I mean, who knows? And I said, and he says, oh, we're going to have supervisors. And I said, well, you may have supervisors. And I said, but you're not going to be armed. Oh, yeah, we will be. I said, no, you're not. This is a bad neighborhood. That's supposedly a nice neighborhood out there. I know because I lived out there, sort of, close to it, South Kansas City. At that time, you know. And so then he had the nerve to, I would not, you know, I talked to the hospital administrator. I told you the time I talked, you know, like twice, you know. Anyway, so he comes back, you know, the security guard. I talked to Mr. So-and-so, And he said, we're going to be armed out there. And I said, what's wrong with you? What makes you think he's going to be hospital administrator out there? Well, he's the administrator. And I said, here, he's an asset because of the community. Out there, he'd be a liability. He won't be going there. And sure enough, he didn't go there. Years and years later, I was in a doctor's office someplace flipping through the magazines that they have there. God, you'd think they would come up with something better. A lot of them were, of course, health magazines. Not exactly health to tell you how to be healthy, but, I flipped through and there's that hospital administrator that I had the little talk with about the gates and stuff. He was a vice president of some major, it looked like, multiple pages in this professional. So I guess he had done okay. I think I can end this after 45 minutes. I'm forgetting something, I'm sure. Oh, no. Big point. Okay. Glad I didn't miss this. Over the years, I ask, because sometimes we would have joint training of security officers on a subject, multiple different hospitals would send some of their security officers for training. And usually Baptist was the hospital because they had a nice auditorium and whatever. And so I would see the security officers occasionally from St. Joe Hospital or whatever. No, from St. Joseph Hospital, the new St. Joseph Hospital. Okay, where do you think they put the plaque up? Whatever it said, John Galega's killed in the line of duty, whatever the date was or something like that, and then a picture of him. Now I can understand, they might have told the family, hey, let's not have a picture of him holding the gun, so how about another picture? That maybe that's what they should have done. So where do you think they put that plaque? Think about it a little bit, and I'll think about it too, and I'll try not to start cussing and swearing. And anyway, yes, the answer is they never put it up. They didn't put it up at the old location. And they didn't put it up at the fine new hospital that they built. Now you're thinking, oh, no, Jim, they put it in the security office. People very rarely probably go to the security office. They could have put it, on the, no, it never went up ever. Wonder where it is now. Did they pitch it out? I don't think they'd have thrown it out. I'm sure they had some place that they put it, and it's been sitting there. John would have liked for it to have been up, The Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, like I told you, when we came back from I was one of the pallbearers. When we came back from there, 3 police cars sitting there, one at each entrance. The officers they'd known how to handle, shootings or other stuff. They wouldn't have known anything about a fire alarm system or a whole bunch of other stuff that, that a hospital security officer would need to know, but they didn't know how to, anyway. But, my wife and I, over John Galegas to our house, and you know, he came with his girlfriend. He was very private. Nobody knew. I don't think anybody, I don't think the hospital even knew that he was married. Because when I showed up, you know, that morning with his bloody clothes there in the bag waiting to be picked up by the police department, you know, crime unit, lab unit or whatever. The director of security, who had just been hired not long before that, he was an engineer with General Motors or something like that. They'd had a layoff, so he got laid off, so they hired him. He, in the security office, he put up 2 or 3 certificates that he had got. Like 8 hours of training on something. Not 8 college credit hours, 8 hours. And the other things were exactly like that. You know, I did go off on this guy. Because when I came in that morning, you know, he says, oh, by the way, don't give these, you know, these to be picked up by the police lab, you know, and then something I don't, you know, and I said, okay. And I said, what's going on? And he says, John Galegas was married and nobody knew it, and now his girlfriend worked in the business office. And I said, oh. And then he said something, oh, and by the way, I got called back to, it was maybe, I forget if it was General Motors, it doesn't matter, you know, car company. And he was an engineer or something. Yeah, he went back. But anyway, he told me he was going back, so I gave him something to travel on. I said, I just want you to know, whatever his name was, that you're responsible for John Galegas' death. So when you leave, you can just keep that in mind. And he didn't say anything. I shouldn't have said that, and it wasn't entirely, you know, entirely true. He took a job, but I don't think he should have taken the job. Well, I don't know. I shouldn't have said that to him. But so I guess I got sidetracked about hats. Oh, hats. Go back to that for a little bit here. We got 7 minutes. So at Trinity, you were supposed to wear a hat, and I didn't, you know. I really didn't. And then I went to Research Medical Center, and you had to wear a hat. You had to wear a hat. The guy who was the director of security there was the worst person, just about, that I know. Worst person. And you had to wear a hat. And just everything that he did was wrong. Now, he was a retired officer. I forget if he was a major or a colonel or whatever, but he was hired, or not hired, but he went through Pendergast, a city boss back in the, you can look him up on the internet or whatever. He helped President Harry Truman, a great man and a great president, by the way. But Pendergast helped him along in his political career. Well, along in his career. And anyway, this director of security, everything he did was something that was just totally inappropriate. He kept information from the administration of the hospital and got by with it for years and years. He just everything that he did was, and he was so racist. Uh, he he tangled with me over racism, and oh man, I could, if I'd have been there when he was talking to me on the phone, I would have been arrested. I don't know what the security officers would have done. 25 security officers. When I was talking, he was, I made a mistake. I had to go downtown on an arrest to Kansas City, go to court, and I came back. And came in and the phone rang, and I wasn't thinking. I picked it up, and it was him, the director of security. I wanted to talk to you about such and such, and it was a minor. It was wintertime, and snow was drifted and everything at the hospital. We switched every 2 hours. I, at that time, was in the parking garage in a Cushman scooter, patrolling that. We had a security officer in a vehicle, patrolling the other, those areas. And, of course, there was a security officer in the emergency room. And I can't remember where, there was another security officer. Sometimes we had 2 cars going. I can't remember exactly, but so I'm in the parking garage, and the outside security officer, this is, I think it was evening shift. He calls and says, I got some drunk UMKC students here, and they're drunk driving, and they're in the, I forget what they called that lot, small lot. And so I headed that way with the Cushman scooter, and I got up there, and he was black, he was a new security officer, he was black. Seemed like a nice guy. I got up there and pulled the scooter up, and I parked the scooter the car was in a snowdrift. Big snowdrift buried in there. And I parked the scooter 2/3 of the way across the parking lot, and I walked over there to the security officer. And he said, I told him to move their car, and I was to myself, like, oh shit, you don't tell somebody that's drunk to move, I didn't, this is to myself, and I said, let me move the scooter, and I didn't get, that's all I said, and they put the metal to the, pushed the pedal to the metal or whatever, and it came flying back, crashed into the Cushman scooter. And so he was standing there, with me. And I said, well, you get to write the report. And he said, why me? And I said, because they crashed into my, my vehicle. And he said, well, they hit my leg. And I said, what? He said, yeah, they hit my leg. And he pulled it, the car bumper or something, it just, Winter didn't get me. Tore his pants, and his leg was bleeding a little bit. And I said, okay, the supervisors are going to get to write the report. Well, the hospital administrator, the guy who, not the hospital director of security, ex-Kansas City, Missouri police officer, worst person I've ever known. Most incompetent. But man, I can tell you dozens of things that he, and anyway, so he puts out a directive. Well, he writes this up. He writes up the security officer who was there in the parking lot that told them, them to move their car after they buried it into a snowdrift. He wrote me up, the security officer who came from the parking garage there. He wrote up the supervisor for not knowing what his 2 guys were doing. And and the thing that he, when the write-up or whatever, he said, that we violated the policy on the vehicles or on whatever. And he said we weren't supposed to back each other up. And finally, the guys that worked for him, mostly all of them, were terrified of him and totally gutless, most of them. But there was a supervisor who wasn't. I mean, he knew what he was dealing with, but and he said, no, we always back each other, up. That's what you're supposed to, that's what you're supposed to do. And of course, the director, no. And he should have stayed in the parking garage, and he shouldn't have gone there, and blah, 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 blah. And then several other security officers, not to his face, not to the director's face, but said things like, no, we always back each other up or whatever. By the way, it was just a week or two after that 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, in the apartments, townhouses or whatever that were rented out to people, we got a call. A lady called. She was a nurse, and she called and said there was a man at her door with a gun trying to get in. And I was the officer in a patrol car, so I went right away, and there he was at the door. I didn't see a gun at that time, or later even. And then there was a car there with 2 or 3, well, let's be honest, black guys in it too. It was a black neighborhood. Is this a racist? It's not. I know it's not. You don't, maybe, but because of the stands that I took at going against department head and other people, not people stuff that went on that shouldn't go on. Anyway, so I was, so I went up and got the guy down from the door and checked him, and he was yelling at the guys in the car, and they were like, opening, getting ready, and I said, if you get out of the car, of course there was, the guy that I got down from the door was a big guy too, and I was a little bit older too at that time, but you got to do your job. And I told those guys, if you get out of the car, you're going to jail. I promise you. Get out of that car and you go to jail. They stayed in the car, and I had to tell them 2 or 3 times. But all that time I was thinking, am I going to get a backup? And all of them came. All the other security officers showed up. The guy did not have a gun. There was a RN there who was white, by the way. That doesn't matter. I'm not saying that matters. But but I wrote the report up. Oh, and the director of security went. I knew he would, but I did it anyway. I knew how to write up a report. But I wrote up the report, such and such and such and such, and the lady who lives here has had repeated problems with visitors, and the director of security should contact and I put, the director of whoever was a vice president of, this corporation, inform her, the person who rents, that if there is any kind of a problem of any sort, if she has any kind of a problem of anything, that, that she's going to be told that she has to move. Oh, the director of security, he went ballistic. He went insane. So then the next day or something like that, that's when I was coming in from court, not to do with that arrest, because court wouldn't have been that soon on the, he called. I walked in and he answered the phone. There he was on the phone. Jim, I just wanted to talk to you. people are saying that you're saying that you won't respond on an officer who needs assistance and that you'll stay in the parking garage or whatever. I've never said, I never said anything like that. I wouldn't have said anything like that. And anybody with any sense, when all the other guys would have, I don't know if somebody made it up or if he made up in his own head or whatever. And then he says, and also, Officer so-and-so, the black security officer who had to go to the emergency room for his leg, he said, and he says, I don't think that he was hurt. And I said, well, you're disagreeing with the ER doctor and the nurses, and you're disagreeing with my eyes because I saw his leg, it was bleeding. And then he said, what was it? What was it? What did he say? I can't remember what it was, but he shouldn't have said it. I think he said, well, you know how they are. Oh, that was it, yeah. You know how they are. I said, who? The way they are. You know how they are. And what did I say? I said, no, I don't know how they are. You tell me, how are they? And then he, this would have been a thing if I'd have been there in person. Of course, he couldn't have done it if I'd been there in person. But honestly, I am not a violent person. But if I'd have been there, it would have been bad for me. This guy's a retired Kansas City, Missouri police officer. He's got at least one son that's on the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. And he'd had 24 security officers who would have sided with him, But, anyway, so he's on the phone, and then he says, I don't know why he says, something, it's been a long time ago. He said, well, I don't know why you're saying that the security officers don't like me. There was somebody in his office. I don't know whether it was one person or two people, or, security officers, or three people. At least there would have been the secretary and his suck-ass, like a lieutenant, and maybe somebody else. And he was doing it for they couldn't hear what I was saying. And he did that. If I'd have been there, I'd have heard him. But I wasn't there. But so he says, okay, well, I'm calling a meeting of security officers on Monday. Now, we never had meetings of security officers on Monday. We always had them on payday, and we didn't have them, of course, every payday, Every few months, we'd have a departmental meeting. 25 security officers showing up. And he was having one on Monday. And I said, okay, I'll see you. I said, you can do it. You're the director of security. You call it, and I'll be there. And I was so pissed at myself that I did not have the recording on that. I had a telephone answering machine, but I picked up the phone. I didn't, record it. I wish I'd have recorded it. I would have recorded it, and I would have gone to human resources with it, and I would have, I was pissed. So anyway, the supervisor of my shift down there, weekend, we worked, I think this was like a Friday or something, so we had Saturday and Sunday, and my supervisor, Jim, he was so afraid. He didn't want to be a supervisor, but he was afraid to tell the director of security, that he didn't want to be the supervisor. And I don't know if somebody said something to him, if somebody had second thoughts and said, calm Jim down or something, whatever. I don't know what went on. But I said, no. He's going to say what he's going to say, and I'm going to say what I'm going to say. Our meetings were 2 hours usually. So we all go to the room, we go in there, and, oh, I forgot this. This is the best part. One of the best parts. This guy worked for the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. I'm sure he didn't really work much for him. In fact, I heard from some people. Anyway, he rose up in ranks, and then he was director of security at General Hospital, which later, that was like the county or city hospital. And then later it became Truman Medical Center. And I could tell you, I know you said it, I could tell you when I worked at St. Joe Hospital, the first hospital I worked at, there was a Kansas City, Missouri police officer whose wife came in quite often. She was sick. And I would talk to him occasionally, how's your wife doing, and stuff like that. And then, I guess I'm going to go ahead and tell you this part. He said, looks like you guys have a really good program here and everything. And I said, oh, thank you. And I appreciate that. And he said, well, can I ask you something? He says, at that point I didn't know he was a Kansas. I probably didn't say, well, thank you. Then I would have, said something different, thanks or something. But he said, I'm a Kansas City, Missouri police officer, and I work over at General Hospital in the unit where we keep the prisoners. And I said, I tell you the truth, I didn't really know you had a unit like that. He said, yeah. And he said, I had problems with a patient and a prisoner, and he was fighting me, and then another one joined in, so two of them were fighting me. And he said there were security officers there in the unit, and he said they didn't help me at all. I said, what? I said, I'm sorry. I can't, I'm sure you're telling me the truth, but I can't believe it. He says, I couldn't believe it either. He said, I asked them, hey, could you lend me a hand? They didn't do anything. And he said, then I got them under control. And then I said to you guys, what's wrong with you guys? And they said, we didn't have any choice. The director of security has told us that if we can't get involved. If we get involved, he'll fire us. And he said, I went to the director of security. Guess who it was, before we moved to research. He said, I went over to him, and I went to his office, and he said, that's what he told me. He says, I've told them not to get involved, not to help. I said, I can't, I'm thunderstruck, I can't believe it, So that's the guy. Anyway, so we're having this meeting that the director of security has called on a Monday. I show up. Everybody sits down except me. I stand up. And the director of security is, in front of us there. And somebody in this room talked to me in a way that I have never been talked to before. Never in my entire career has anybody ever talked to me like he talked to me. He didn't show me respect or whatever. And then he said, what was it? Okay, he says, that's the end of the meeting. Meeting dismissed. We all left as we're going out. I thought everybody else knew. Because my supervisor, I think I told you, he'd been talking to me for 2 days. Jim, don't say anything. Don't say anything. And I said, I'm going to say something. We're going out the door, and the guy, what's this about? What's going on? And I knew they didn't know anything. Anyway, thank you very much it's 8:45 a.m. in the morning. I need to find something to eat. Ooh. Yeah, well, it's too early for it. I think I might have mentioned at the beginning, we're getting some, our son, one of our sons, sent us like a Christmas package or whatever is coming today, so I'm sure it'll have summer sausages or something like that, and have cheeses, different cheeses. I love cheeses. And I'm not sure what else, so I'm looking forward to that. So thank you very much for watching.